folks, and welcome back to the farm. As you maybe see there, we got a new intro video. Hope you like it. I'm back in the tractor. Yeah, I joked last week about this being my new recording studio, but it seems to be a good place for some peace and quiet to have a chat with you folks when it's super windy outside. And today it is super windy outside. How windy, you might ask? Well, when I got home from work this evening, the temperature was -3. But our weather station in the house was telling us that the wind chill was -17.6. So pretty doggone windy. So it's not a good time to be outside right now. Even though we are experiencing warmer weather, it certainly doesn't feel like it. So it was actually a good evening to come in the shop and spend a bit of time with some eggs. In fact, yeah, I just finished up washing 18 dozen eggs. That seems like an awful lot, and yeah, it is an awful lot. But finally got those all washed up, and I got to thinking, well, you know, right around this time of year, it's not uncommon to see questions from some folks wondering why egg production is decreased, or in some cases stalled out completely, and what they can do to increase production or to get that production spurred back on again. So we're here in December now, so what we should be seeing is the waning of the molt that typically happens in this part of the world anyways. October, anywhere in mid-October typically is where we see it here on the farm. But it also could, you know, if weather or external factors, stress inside the coop could cause that molt to last quite a bit longer. And sometimes even after they've molted and they've got all their feathers back and things are tickety-boo, the girls are just like, yeah, no, that was a nice holiday. I think I'm just gonna stay on holiday. So what can you do to get things back going so we're being productive again? Well, in order to know that, we really have to have an understanding of how an egg is formed. So when a chick is hatched, like a female chick is hatched, it has every egg it's ever going to lay inside of it already, right? There's no external forces required. All the magic of life, billions and billions of lives are essentially inside this egg already, right? So it's a pretty magical thing. Now when that egg reaches, or that chick, sorry, reaches maturity, which could happen anywhere from 18 to 36 weeks. The longest we've actually seen here on the farm is 26 weeks. But I have heard tell us some folks going as long as 36 weeks. The average, I think, for most folks with chickens is about 18 weeks. We live a little bit farther north, and so usually our maturity age is a little bit longer. This is what we find, anyways. But yeah, so they'll start laying, and so when they first go to do this, so they'll have this is just the yolk, a little tiny yolk called an oocyte, and that will get deposited into the oviduct. And then from there, it'll get something called albumin wrapped around it. Albumin is essentially the egg white. And as the albumin is deposited around the yolk will actually spin, right? And it'll actually twist. And it'll twist up almost like braiding, not braiding, but like a rope, I guess, twisting like a rope, the albumin or the egg white. And at the bottom of the egg yolk, where the egg yolk attaches to the egg white, you'll get something called a chalice or chalice, and that's really just a fibrous section where the white and the yolk connect to each other, and that's really what keeps the yolk centered in the white. Now after that's done, then you'll get the shell membranes that will actually form on the inner portion. And if you know what shell membranes are, every time you've tried to make deviled eggs and you can't get your eggshells to peel properly, that's what's deposited next. And then, so the egg is now sitting in the uterus of the chicken, and for the next right around 16 hours, you'll be getting the actual shell, which is primarily calcium carbonate, deposited on the egg itself. And then after like 16 hours, that's an important number to remember. Keep that one in your pocket for later. But yeah, after the actual shell is formed, the egg will be sitting, it's going to be sitting like this, right? After it's formed. And then it's going to rotate so that the large end is towards the rear of the chicken. The chicken will deposit its bloom, and the egg will pass from the uterus through the cloaca and be laid. So pointy end last, actually. So it's just the magic of birth, I guess, is the narrow end goes last. They got to go through some tribulation to get there, but that's very, very important, because if they go pointy end first, obviously this gets wider. You can end up basically just like a breech birth in any other type of animal. You get something called egg bind or egg bound, and the egg will get stuck there. The chicken will try and force it out, and it can be very injurious to the chicken, as well as perhaps even to the egg. And you might even see poop and stuff like that deposit on the egg if it didn't turn around, which could lead to bacteria and all kinds of nasty things. But yeah, that's essentially how an egg is formed. But back to the 16 hours. Why is the 16 hours while this little eggshell is formed important? Well, that's kind of the average number of hours that a chicken egg requires in terms of light in a day to be laid. So we here in northern Alberta, I mean, we're now, what are we now, the 8th of December, I think we are, and we're getting about a good solid 6 hours of daylight. So there's a 10-hour deficit there where no vitamin D is getting soaked up by these puppies. So what do we do about that? Well, it's pretty common practice to add supplemental light. That's pretty universal. I think a lot of folks are looking at doing that. But what's the right amount? Do you really want to shoot for that 16 hours? Should it be in the morning? Should it be in the evening? Should it be on both ends of the day? And well, my opinion anyways, and certainly what works for us here, is we add light in the morning, but we do not add any light at the end of the day. So what that means is our chickens get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. The light comes on at 3, and this is this time of year. You know, we stage it. It's all on a timer. So as the hours of the day actually get darker and darker and darker and shorter and shorter and shorter, we extend that timer in the morning. So right now that's where we're at. We're at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's probably going to stay there right up until the 21st of December. And the light goes off at 9 o'clock in the morning, just when natural daylight, the sun's come up, it's got natural daylight, might as well shut the lights off, right? And that works well to maintain a longer light cycle during the day. What we don't do is add light at the end of the day, and the reason for that is chickens have a pretty good circadian rhythm, in that as light will start to decline in the evening, they're going to want to make their way back to the chicken house. They're all free range here, right? They've got the run of the whole place, but as the light starts to dim, they're going to want to make their way back to the chicken house, probably find their way to a roost, and just kind of settle in for the evening. If they make their way back to the chicken house and it's all disco balls and lights and everything's bright and party, let's go, give her in there, well, that doesn't help them get rested. But now there's all these chickens milling around on the floor of the chicken house, typically not in the roosts, and that can lead to some social unrest, a little bit of disorder perhaps, and some stress. Now stress is an important factor, because stress will also help, or not help I guess, in terms of egg production. Increased stress will reduce your egg production. But then what happens at 9 or 10 o'clock or whatever time of night you want to turn your light off? Boom, it goes from being nice and bright like this to being pitch black. Now chickens are not renowned for being able to see very well in the dark. In fact, typically what they'll do is they'll just hunch down like this, and they'll just lay there where they're at and just hope for the best. And that's why chickens don't survive very well in the wild if they don't get up into some high branches. And if they're on the ground level, they're very, very vulnerable, and they know it, and that adds again to the stress. So we want them to actually use the natural decline of daylight in the evening to get them into the roost and get them settled, and that will help them be more comfortable, less stress. Overall, it's better for the chickens. Now, that's just getting, the maximum amount of eggs that you can possibly get out of the ladies. But you ever see in the fall where the eggs you're getting are a little bit small? Or as I previously mentioned, maybe you're still not getting any eggs. Now what can you do for that? Well, what's in an egg? a whole bunch of protein, a whole bunch of vitamin D. You know, what can we do? What can we do to supplement that, right? So add high protein feeds, right? If you're already feeding them a good layer ration or a good variety of fruits, vegetables, things like that, add some high protein feed. So black oil sunflower seed actually works really, really well. It's something we use here typically in the fall. We don't use it all year long, but it's really good at certain times when they are obviously under stress due to things like the molt, right? They just lost all their feathers, which I don't know why they try to pick October. It's like literally the worst time to do it. Hey, it's going to snow. Let's just take all our clothes off. But and that's usually how it works. And then they're just like for a couple of weeks, and then it kind of comes around and they figure it out. But they're focusing all the energy that they would probably put into eggs, the protein production that goes into eggs, now into protein production for the growth of new feathers, right? So feed them a little bit more protein. That'll probably speed up that process, and it might even spur them out of, you know, their holidays, I guess you could say. So now, the other thing to consider, if your birds have molted, they've got all their feathers back, everything is triple happy teddy bears, but they just won't lay again, what can we do? Well, then we need to evaluate what's really happening in your chicken house. Is it comfortable in terms of, you know, it's well insulated, it's draft free? Do we have sufficient room and space for the birds? So do we have 2 to 3 square feet of roost space per bird? Have you introduced anything new to the chicken house that could theoretically cause, well, it's not always stress. Sometimes it's just excitement, right? A change in the coop, no matter what time of year, will cause for, you know, 7 to 14 days usually will cause a disruption in some way, shape, or form, whether it's good or bad. It's right. It's just like, even if it's a good thing, quite often it's just like giving your kids candy before bed, right? It gets them too excited, and then, well, that becomes a problem. Introduction of light. If, you know, your chickens are not laying eggs, and then you're like, okay, well, I think I'm going to try adding a light to the coop and then see what that does. Now that's a whole new thing, right? It's just something else in the coop that they're not used to, and it's going to take them a little bit longer than you would expect to, I guess, acclimate to having that in their environment. The other thing to watch for too, as chickens do go into the molt and they're losing feathers, sometimes the pecking order changes a little bit, just because chickens, you know, the new appearance, new plumage. Sometimes as they're losing feathers, they may be a little bit more vulnerable to some of the bigger, the more bully type chickens than previously were. And so it's important to make sure that, you know, there's no social unrest in the coop. Things are cozy, things are comfortable, they're nice and warm. They have a high protein feed, they have a good source of water, clean water supply. And if that doesn't work, I don't know, put a radio in there and play some John Denver. Maybe that works for dairy cows. I don't know if it would work for chickens, but worth a try. Anyhow, if I stay out here any longer and talk about eggs, it'll be time to get up and go cook some for breakfast. So I better get in the house, get myself a cup of tea, and get off to bed. So I hope you have a fantastic evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.